Hey guys, it's Karina here with another video. Hope you guys are all doing well. So today I'm going to be talking about sexuality. So this past year in university, I took a course called LGBTQ Studies, and this was an amazing course. We talked about a lot of different topics and really dived into queer studies and the issues queer people face. And one of the first units we did that was very interesting was just about sexuality and sexual disorientation and how confusing sexuality can be and how broad it is and how fluid sexuality is. So one of the academic articles that we read was from this book called Straight by Hanne Blank, and we read the introduction called Sexual Disorientation. And in this book, just for a little Google summary, it says that Hanne Blank delves deep into the contemporary psyche as well as historical record of heterosexual relations, a subject that is anything but straight. So she delves into how complex sexuality can actually be. And one of the first things she talks about is intersex. So intersex is essentially neither male or female. It is a type of gender. It would be someone who maybe has male genitalia but then also has breasts or different mix of different female and male parts essentially. So she talks about this and how this kind of blurs sexual orientation and how can anyone be really straight if there is more than one gender. And in her article she talks about how there is scientific proof that there is actually 5 major genders, and I'll dive a bit more into that later. And just a couple of highlighted things that I noticed from her article that really stood out to me was one quote from page 9. She says, "Assumptions of sexual orientations are never merely innocent perceptions because these perceptions shape behaviors." So this just explains how any perception can affect sexual orientation, and how society and our perceptions in society affects orientation as well. Another really good quote is, she says, "Heterosexuality is like air, all around us yet invisible." So I think this really explains how heterosexuality works in our society. Another quote that goes along nicely with this is, "Having decided that heterosexuality exists, we maintain correspondingly unshakable faith that it exists for a reason. Hardly anyone seems to notice or care that we go back and forth some more, but what about the reason that might be?" So essentially, heterosexuality is around us, and because it is so normalized, we believe it is normal and should be the normal, is essentially what she's saying, which makes things really complicated. Another really good quote is from page 16. She says, "One reason that the biological sex may not be as clear-cut as it may seem is because biology can change." So over time, things can change, and the biological sex can change. And another really good quote as well is she says, "Describing any two sexes as a gender as opposite is not a fact. It is merely an outdated and inaccurate custom." And I believe this is really true, because to say two genders are opposite it's very inaccurate, especially considering there is the intersex and there is other sexes, and we are still discovering more and more when it comes to sex and sexual orientation. So I think this is an outdated concept. So I think a lot of what plays into the factor of sexual disorientation is our society and how we see sexual orientation. So in this class it was really cool. We would read these articles and then we would create a reading response, and then all of our classmates would write reading responses as well, and then we would respond to a classmate's reading response. So I'm going to read my reading and response, and then I'm going to share with you one of my friends' reading response, and then my response to her. So I'm going to start off by reading my reading response to the article. Straight by Hanne Blank. The introduction, Sexual Disorientation, is a very thought-provoking chapter. In that introduction, she explained the concept of the intersex, and later on mentions that there have been studies to prove at least 5 major sexes. This makes me question what sexual orientation is, or what it means, or if it really matters. Can we just love whomever and not put a label on it? In the article, Hanne says, I have no deep personal attachment to labeling myself in terms of sexual orientation, nor do I have a sensation of being hetero or homosexual, or anything but a human being who loves and desires other human beings. This is so beautifully said. Sexuality is fluid, and why do we have to put a label on it? Something that really got me thinking as well is how Hanne talked about how we are assigned at birth our sex, simply by a visual check. This made me question why our world is this way. Our sex is more complicated than a simple visual check. And why do we need to have sex assigned at birth? Can't we just let the individual determine their own sex? Hanne also explains how none of us perfectly fit into the box of gender. She says, describing any two sexes or genders as opposite is not a fact. It is merely an outdated, inaccurate custom. None of us are perfectly male or female. So my question is, why do we need labels on the different sexes and different sexual orientations? Or can we just simply identify as humans rather than a gender and claim our sexual orientation as simply being attracted to other humans? So this is the question I came up with, and you'll see how my view kind of changes and how later on I come to a different conclusion. In general, I did just want to expand on the point of how none of us are male or female, or perfectly male or female. I think this is something that's so true. We all are such a mix of male and female and masculine and feminine traits. None of us fits perfectly into any box. So I think that was something really well said as well. So now I'm going to read my friend Eliza's response to the reading. She said, this week's reading, particularly Sexual Disorientation by Hanne Blank, urged me to reflect on my preconceived notions about gender, sex, and sexual orientation. I gathered humans tend to specify yet oversimplify gender and sex. I believe it is a common misconception that by defining these words, we are clarifying when Blank's narrative clearly outlines that this is far from true. We can see this when doctor clinics provide those check boxes to gain insight on your sexual orientation and to clarify what information to give their patient. And yet it can bring internal turmoil, anxiousness, and skepticism if the patient cannot find the right answer. Our society has oversimplified gender and sexuality for as long as we have known. And nowadays, people tend to crack jokes about different terms that have emerged and questioning this. I've often heard something along the lines of, they aren't man or woman, so what are they, a dog? Which pinpoints the lack of knowledge on their part. We have formed definitions on biological sex solely based off the external genitalia of a person, and yet sexologist John Moley has distinguished 7 different criteria, including human chromosomes and sex hormones and internal genitals. While it seems complicated if we implement this new system in determining biological sex, it almost should be, though, because humans are complicated, and this is within our nature. To create an oversimplification of a person's biological sex is almost to discredit to the wonderful fascinations that human beings are. So I think Eliza so beautifully summed up why it is important that we do have different definitions of sex and different definitions of sexual orientation and what that looks like, and how this creates places for people to belong to, and how oversimplifying it does discredit people. So the response I came up with is, reading your response makes me question whether we should oversimplify sexual orientation and gender. I think in some ways it's really nice to oversimplify it so that we see that we are all similar and that we are all humans, loving humans. However, it is important to also have specific orientations and genders so that we don't discredit, as you said, the wonderful fascinations that human beings are. So I believe it is important that we feel, and everyone feels, like they can belong and they have people out there that are like them. Without different terms for sexuality and gender, I don't know if it would be as easy for people to find the people they belong with or people that are like them. It'd be extremely challenging if there wasn't the LGBTQ plus community, or there wasn't all these terms to identify with. It would be hard to even come to terms with who you are as a person, or what you like, or what your sexuality is, if we didn't have the language for it. So as much as oversimplifying can be nice, I think it is important we educate ourselves and we learn about the LGBTQ community so that we can understand where people are coming from and what their sexuality is and what resonates with them. So I think this whole article was beautiful because it helped me see the importance of the LGBTQ plus community and the importance of having these labels and the importance of learning about what all these different labels mean and how these people identify as. And this article also just made me realize how many genders there actually are and how science is still developing and how harmful heterosexuality can be and how harmful the patriarchy and the heterosexuality around us, and just how the stereotypes around us can be really harmful to our sexual orientation and discovering your own sexual orientation. And my biggest takeaway from reading this article was that, like, we are no one's straight. Like, you can't just be straight. Like, since there are so many genders, like, what is straightness? It goes to prove, like, that straightness is really just a myth, and like it can't really be defined as one thing because, once again, humans are just so complex. So yeah, that's kind of like my takeaway from reading this, and I would love to read Hanne Blank's full book straight and dive more into her chapters, as she is an amazing author, and honestly, like, she was probably, I think, my favorite reading, like, from the entire year. This was a full year class, and like her chapter just hit home for me and it really challenged my thinking. So yeah, I will link below the author's full name and her book, and I highly recommend you check it out. And I hope today something challenged you and something got you thinking. And I would love it if you guys like this video and you subscribe and comment and let me know what you think. And yeah, I hope you guys have a wonderful week. See you guys later. Bye!